I never know how to start this thing at all. I never know how to start it. Um, Part two. That's how we're gonna start it.
I know, you know, we all know what it is when a hot comb hits your hair on a Sunday morning, what it smells like. That's a cultural difference, not just a color difference.
Right.
So it's the culture.
You know about a hot comb scenario?
She don't know about no
no.
hot comb.
This part is gonna be on monarchy and clans a little bit. Actually, is it gonna be a monarchy and clans? Let me see what it's gonna be like because I wrote this a long time ago. This is gonna be on early identity formation and how it evolved. But before I say that, I know sometimes I might sound like a Muzungu pessimist, but one of those identities is obviously has to do with monarchy and kingship and stuff like that. But if the Mwami was ousted during independence and can't somehow come to agreements with all republics, the Kaiwandas, the Habyarimanas, the Kagames, I don't think that's on the Muzungu, honestly, before we talk about like identity formation and kingship. I think that, you know, this should be an honorable thing. If honestly Kofi Annan was given an emotional and sacred state sword when he went back to Ghana before his death, being a UN ahead of UN, the mommy can get better than hers. But let's get back to the time machine and to pre-colonialism. In the past, cultural differences in the region have been linked with productive forms, highlighting especially the opposition of cattle culture and agriculture economies. In this conceptual framework, each mode of production was taken to be associated exclusively with a particular ethnic group and ultimately with particular races: Tutsis with cattle, Hutus with agriculture, and Twa with trapping and hunting. In short, the history of cattle has been linked to the history of the ruling elite. Uh, the end of pre-colonialism and towards colonialism, and how social formations, political formations were being formed. And cattle and agriculture long existed before dynasties. So it's not like, cows automatically just showed up and became like, this helm of deity. There's been multiple evidence of pastoral area, both farming and grazing, and how language usually corresponded to ecological regions, which means any community at some point had either cows or planted something. Now, we'll see the political alignment, trading, local migration obviously evolved over time and how goods and services played a key role. But there's a refutation of the assumption that pastoral skills were associated with only one culture and cattle with another culture. Just because you like chicken doesn't make you black. The same way eating boiled eggs does not make you Ghanaian. Ghanaians will get that joke because they eat boiled eggs every single time. I also like chicken and cows for that matter, and eggs. Maybe not boiled, but it does not make me more black or a Ghanaian. I also covered this in part one, but iron production is another example of ecological evolution where production technique of iron smelting required a large amount of deforestation, but in turn created a richer agricultural soil, which ushered in a planting of new crops like bananas and plantains. In case you haven't caught up on part one, there's no genesis of Hutu, Tutsi, special groups, ethnicities, clans, or race, even though they are focused on mostly in mainstream discussion. If you've already watched part three, before watching the other two parts, welcome. Now go watch the other two parts and including part one, and it will make sense. And taking it back to the common language, if it is to be understood that ethnic groups like Luo, Kikuyu, then a cultural group who speak a common language, meaning the Banyarwanda, fits within the cultural group of East African community. Burundians are within the same community and are with the same ethnic and language group within the Banyarwanda community. Think of Rwandans, Burundians to Kenyans, Tanzanians as far as languages go. Again, go watch part one and it will make sense. The same reason why I say that the Banyambo within the dynasty clan identify themselves as Banyambo instead of Banyarwanda or Rwanda. Again, it's a form of identity on how you decide to identify yourselves. And obviously, the recent ones that we've been seeing are the Banyamulenge. Even though they themselves are within the Banyarwanda community and in East Africa. Bachiga, who are considered people of the mountains, share the same regional language, but not the same political institution based on where they settle, since more Bachiga reside in Uganda than in Rwanda in the West. I've actually met some Bachiga. Their Kinyarwanda is very thick, like they're thick. I'm pretty sure within those regions, there's subgroups, there's chiefs you can find within different regions. I know that Eastern Congo has chiefs which were killed during the First and Second Congo War, and that's scary because killing a chief is basically killing the head of the community. Same way as we're talking about the Bachiga in Uganda, they might probably have a different thick accent and different dialect in Kinyarwanda than the ones close to Burundi or Tanzania. Sometimes we put again emphasis on those things, and sometimes we forget that people are the ones that usually matter. But again, when you glorify those things, when you glorify identities, which it matters, and it's definitely very important. But do not miss the point that people are the ones who make those identities. Identities do not just form themselves. I hate to spoil it, but prequel to colonialism is short in the 1800s and 1900s. Not because we don't have thousands of years to decipher pre-colonialism, but because we are moving away from those systems much faster in this age. We shouldn't have to talk about mass graves being found in Congo and Iran this fast, and we haven't gotten away from that yet. Two persons may possess the same broad cultural identity, Manyarwanda, and yet be marked by different political identities, Hutu or Tutsi. The cultural identity, Munyarwanda, in the singular, Munyarwanda in the plural, exists along in the tension with the political identity, Hutu Tutsi, whether in singular or in plural. Mamdani says if you go to Rwanda or Burundi, the purity of social definition is striking. Everyone you meet identifies as either Hutu or Tutsi. There's no hybrids, there's no Hutsi, which is funny. Like, Hutsi should be an identity. Low-key. Right now, if my grandfather and my grandmother saw that I was not Catholic, they would smack the shit out of me because that was their identity. Now, does it say that we never had talks about Hutu, Tutsi within family? I mean, hell, ID cards still existed during in the 90s. So those still existed. Again, contextually, they existed. But in hindsight, for them to be able to have to go against that grain and say Rwanda or Rwandans per se, that's basically going against the grain. This double consciousness really exists. And if it is, it's pretty toxic. It's pretty political. It can be hateful. And it's honestly not mainstreamed. My mind has never understood these dualities, even when I was a kid. You can only be Rwandan. Hutu and Tutsi is kind of like a sin in Rwanda. You can't, it's not really talked about. even though it's in the Constitution, it's still not talked about. But yeah, the context that he meant by if you go to Rwanda or Burundi, the purity of social definition is striking. Everyone you meet identifies as either Hutu Tutsi. There's no double hybrids. None is Tutsi. He's meaning early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. Because I think the book was written in the late 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. When cohabitation takes form of marriage, the wife takes on the identity of the husband. Now, on some other culture, that's not the same cohabitation that occurs. For instance, my mom took the identity of my dad, going back into some identity formation as far as like patrilineal and matrilineal. I just saw this, by the way, so don't sue me if I say it wrong. But patrilineal is basically relating to or based on relationship on the father or descent through the male line. So basically, the same way that my grandfather and my grandmother did it was mostly through patrilineal. And there's some culture that is matrilineal, which is based on kinship with mother or female line. Again, that's an identity that that female line or male line decide to choose, whether matrilineal or patrilineal. Again, people I think a lot of put a lot of emphasis on this, and it's for the people, by the people, we the people. But yeah, so you can have those patrilineal, matrilineal, obviously within within different cultural, within certain different clans. I think this one was in either. I think there were some in Kenya, Uganda that had those patrilineal, matrilineal. Um, so I'm seeing that also in Rwanda. So it's 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 whatever, man. Do you, boo boo? But I slightly disagree with the hybrid part because I a long time wrote there's no mixed Hutu or Tutsi because obviously I'm both Hutu and Tutsi. I love both on my side of Hutu and Tutsi family. We kick it, we enjoy it, we have hard conversations. Some are usually crazy, some are not crazy, but it's my identity, it's who I am. So I wrote it because I was tired of explaining to people that I'm from Rwanda after being asked whether my parents were Hutu or Tutsi. Also, in a more sadistic way, people often tried to paint my existence on how my proximity was on the existence to a victim or a killer, if that kind of makes sense. If that does not make sense, you have not seen geopolitics in Rwanda, Burundi, or Congo for that matter. Why people perceive African and black people differently, if y'all haven't noticed. They feel safer with an African than a black person. Inversely, Africans have also been brainwashed to feel ease of proximity to a white person than a black person. I've also been called an African booty scratcher. So I think sometimes language, identity formation, culture, all are shaped by how our surroundings are. And especially in this high in age, people are very sensitive. And I think when it comes to certain communities being persecuted, you can understand why certain tones um, can be deemed to be hurtful. Anti-Semitism right now is at its highest, but so is Islamophobia. It's at its highest. Um, of the rhetoric of Christians being uh, uh, murdered and killed. That's false. Yes, there are some Christians who are being killed, but it's not a persecution agenda. Um, so, and when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's a hated conversation, especially when it comes to Palestinians. When a genocide is going on, the the perception is you're an anti-Semite if you speak against the injustices happening within the Palestinian community. Obviously, that's a wider discussion of conquer and divide because the irony is that it convinces white people that racism, colonialism, that it doesn't affect them, which it honestly does. Black people are not a monolithic group. The same way African is not a country. But as a kid that grew up with those dualities, it messes with your mind in an imaginable way. As a child, I always said that I have more in common with kids that we met and both knew that we honestly didn't have parents. And ironically, like any evolutions, identities also exist within orphans, widows, and widowers, aka why diversity and a need for representation always matter. I think in the grand scheme of things of globalization, especially in the early 2000s, um, um, people didn't really understand the toll that President Obama was taking as the first black president, um, to be able to somehow magically fix everything. Um, that's a video for the next time. Understanding identities matter because they tell dynasties, court systems, pre-colonial military formation, just like the way they tell of any social economics. While regional identities were strong in both states, they were even more coherent and enduring in Burundi than in Rwanda. Furthermore, fragmentation with three identities is further seen in Burundi than Rwanda. In dissecting four clear internal distinctions, the Baganwa were descendants of kings up to four generations. Even though their genealogy origin of the Gangwa dynasty was Hutu, socially and politically, the Baganwa was associated with Tutsi. But when demoted from dynasty, Baganwa were accepted as of the Tutsi status. Hima too was a category with ambiguous to Tutsi status. While they were part of social class of Tutsi, they were culturally distinct, assumed to be cattle hoarders, and have been known to have strong political identity. And again, it seems like certain cultural identities just decide to step away from from, from the heated topics of Hutu Tutsi. They're like, yeah, you know what? Let's just stick to our sticks. Um, let's just stick to the river that we used to. But those were the Bahima basically. Um, and it seems like their political identity apparently has gradually, gotten stronger because they basically chose to associate them as Bahima. Um, where were we? There were important distinctions regarding cultural rituals as well, which we will touch on in part 3 heavy. The ritualist guardians of the royal tombs, who's responsible for royal ritual, court diviners, healers, religious personnel, and many others, often had a separate status. Such roles, of course, existed in Rwanda, but in Burundi, these were more numerous and more diverse and included more women than in Rwanda, attesting to the less complete consolidation of centralized authority or more coherent region integrity in Burundi. And that is part 2, geared towards identity formation um, in certain region, obviously within Burundi and Rwanda. Part 3 is definitely going to be about monarchy and clans. This is when it's gonna go crazy because with power consolidation came a lot of change. So we will cover that in part 3. I appreciate it, and I'm a holla.